So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Workbar Live. My name is Chelsea Hildreth, the Events and Partnerships Manager at Workbar, and it's our pleasure to welcome Dr. Camille Preston, the founder of AIM Leadership. She will be presenting today on the psychology behind workplace wellness. To start, just a little bit about the company and Camille. AIM Leadership is a development coaching firm dedicated to improving individual, team, and organizational effectiveness by developing leadership capabilities from the inside out. Their work has been featured in Forbes, Fortune magazine, and the Huffington Post. Camille founded this company in 2004 and with her passion for leadership reform, which started after working for the Police Executive Research Forum. She is a committed yogi, a marathon runner, and has written several books on business psychology. Just a few notes for our guests. If you're new to Zoom webinars, you'll only be able to see Camille and I. A lot of people have questions as to why they can't see themselves in the screen. That's a Zoom meeting. This is a Zoom webinar. It will be best to have your screen on gallery mode, which you can see in the top right corner of your screen. And then please feel free to ask questions during Camille's presentation. We'll answer them as we go, whether during or at the end. And you can enter these by clicking on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen or in the chat box, and I'll be tracking both of those. So thank you for joining us today, Camille. Can you please explain business psychology and how you started your business, AIM Leadership?
Fantastic. Well, thank you for having me here today. And thank you for the care that I see Workbar bringing to so many of the members, because it is an absolutely exceptional time that we're living through. And it's nice to be able to have community, even though we're separate but apart, and still part of a community. So I actually got my career took a major pivot when I started working for the Police Executive Research Forum. My first day on the job was 9/11, which was the day that hometown security became homeland security. And all of a sudden I was working with a number of police chiefs, police executives from large jurisdictions, and they were saying, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't get trained for this. What does this look like? So for your intro, that was really where my passion around leadership development came from. I really think about the work that I've been doing. It's come through a lot of different iterations. I've had my company for over 17 years now. But it really comes back to this idea that we are all interested in understanding ourselves so that we can be more effective in our business, in our leadership, in our collaborations, and so forth. And so psychology was my doctorate. It's the root of kind of a lot of my passions, but it's also what really, I think, is at a really seminal point for where we are today. And one of the questions I get is, how is a business psychologist different from coaching? And there's a lot of similarities. I think of business psychology as kind of Coach Plus, where we both work with individuals, teams, and organizations, and we all are focused on optimization. But a psychologist has the capacity to go much deeper, so we can build new skills, horizontal development, building new capabilities, but then go deeper to understanding what's happening in an individual with the idea of really optimizing and setting up for success. And if that's a complicated description, a client said this to me the other day that made me laugh. She's like, after a long description, he said, so you're just like the billions lady. And the answer would be yes, without the sadomasochistic marriage. But yeah, that's kind of the basics of how I think of it.
That's a funny comparison. Okay, so just jumping in, what are you seeing most company leaders are dealing with during this time? Like obviously stress and crisis management and all of that.
Yeah, this is an incredible period of amplification and also acceleration. And for the good things, that's great. For the bad things, that's horrible. And we're seeing an amplification of stress, financial, emotional, physical, taking care of our loved ones. We're seeing amplification of disruption in routines, in our health, in our finances, in our supply chain, in our business models. And then we're just all navigating an incredible amount of uncertainty and complexity. So it's really interesting to see how different leaders are managing the complexity that's coming towards them. Personally, I will also share that I'm managing those disruptions, but also the joys of trying to learn how to add an entirely new job into my job description as we learn to homeschool our 2 young kids, which is
well, yes,
character building at best. So I think what I'm seeing people really try to navigate is, how do I build awareness for what's happening? How do I get clear on how I'm leading? And then how do I do all this amid, again, this rapid acceleration and amplification?
Yeah.
I'll share a quick joke with the story with the audience. Chelsea and I spoke, was it the first time we spoke last week?
Yeah. Yes.
And we got on the call and we were just starting to chat, and I've never met Chelsea. I've never seen her. It was over the phone. And I got about 2 minutes into the conversation. I was like, wow, Camille, how much coffee have you had? Because I was so animated. And then I was like, you haven't had a lot of coffee. Maybe it's just adult conversation. Maybe it's adult conversation. I was like, oh no, I'm still like in kindergarten teacher mode, which is like very effusive and very like directed. And so I'm noticing this in myself where we're shifting gears a lot now that we're working from home. And I know a lot of people are really shifting gears, whether it's in their family responsibilities or shifting gears as to what their business is looking like. I'll give people one more way to think about what's happening for business leaders is many people had a plan that was laid out. We're at the end of Q3. They thought, end of Q1, third month in Q1. And we thought we were moving forward in a way that was really clear. And all of a sudden we've rerouted. And we'll share an article at the end of this, but almost every leader I see is having to re-examine their strategy. They're having to implement whole new sets of decisions that happen really, really quickly, hard, complex decisions implemented quickly. And then most leaders I know are either stage 3 or stage 4, which is, how do I heal from this? How do I recover from this? This is exhausting. Or how do I start to innovate? What's the next stage for my company? Because we are going to emerge from this. We're going to figure out the next step, but there's a lot of stages that are happening along the way that's really intense.
Yeah. So on that note, what are the best tips for handling a crisis, this crisis that you can give business leaders right now?
Yeah. So there's a couple different angles to this, and compassion, I think, is a really big one of how do you kind of enter every situation, every equation, believing that everyone's doing their best and that we're all doing it differently. It's going to look different for all of us, but we're doing our best. The other thing I see time and again, and there's a lot of psychological research that supports this, is the more that you can manage your bandwidth, your time, energy, and attention to have bandwidth to focus on this, the better off you're going to be set up for success. And I'll go a little bit further with that, which is what we know is that bandwidth is vital. When we have the energy, time, and attention to be able to engage effectively with these changes, we're more likely to experience post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress. So having that bandwidth set up in advance. And I get that the compassion is really challenging. Can I give you a quick example of that?
Absolutely.
So I have a client who's absolutely phenomenal, fast-growing technology company. They had the best 2 months of their entire operation. Going into March, they were planning on 45% growth in staff. They were going to hire 35 new people. They were just fired up and excited. March brought a 98% drop in revenue. 98% drop in revenue. They had to fire 5 people, and they furloughed 10 people. And everybody who was, above a certain pay level took fairly significant paychecks. So where they were in March was totally different than where they were at the end of March. And what I think these leaders did that was really, really powerful was focus on surviving. We all want to thrive, but right now it's about surviving. They had what I call realistic, they balanced realism with optimism. So they were able to see what's happening and also be really honest. And then they also did that third step, I think, really, really well. They, with the people they had to terminate, they had their staff go through and do goodbye videos for them. And they coached their staff on saying, like, in these goodbye videos, what is it that you admire about this person? What has been the impact of this person in your life? How are you different because of this person? So helping the person who is leaving with a real wonderful boost of, I'm loved, it's not me, it's the circumstances, but also simultaneously helping their team grieve as they moved into this new phase. So I think leaders have to hold all of this, and it's really complicated in this day and age.
Yeah. Well, talking about complications, can you touch on some of the complexities that leaders are dealing with now while they're balancing the compassion and the reality of these times?
Yeah. So there's This is an interesting question because I've been really fascinated to see why is it that some leaders are thriving kind of with the
Mhm.
complexity, and maybe thriving is not the right word. They're really able to hold the complexity of what is and able to step into it with um, kind of their full self, and other people are really finding it more challenging. And Viktor Frankl, who wrote this phenomenal book, Man's Search for Meaning, about his time surviving the Holocaust, talked about tragic optimism. And he said that it's really important to be realistic, to recognize what's going on. This is that kind of third stage of acknowledging the grief. And it could be lost loved ones. It could be grief of lost revenue. It could be grief of lost opportunities, or, for some of the youth in our lives, like they're not going to have their college graduation or their high school graduation or their junior prom. And those are real things they sound trite. It's important to grieve them. And then to start to kind of layer in meaning around it. And I was talking with a client of mine yesterday who's originally a nurse. She's now a COO at a hospital. And we were talking, and she said, "Camille, I just decided to stay home." And I was like, "Your voice, what's happening?" She's like, and she's like, "I'm so weepy and I have so much going on. And I just feel like I'm not even on the front line. Why are you so upset? Like, pull it together." And it's really interesting. We have to have that tragic optimism, like owning what is, but then also looking into the future. And I think that's what leaders do. They see the now, they acknowledge the now, they look to tomorrow, but then they plan for the future. And so when we think about leading in complexity, it's being able to do all of those kind of simultaneously. And again, when we've done our vertical work, kind of knowing more about who we are and what makes us tick and understanding ourselves, I think we're better set up for what that looks like. And man, it's complicated, but it's where we are.
Yeah. And how can business leaders instill this compassion for their employees now? You gave a great example before, but if you have any others or any tips or advice, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, it's funny. It's interesting to have something you talk about, but also you practice on a regular basis. Because I think now is one of those times where we're building on a lot of the successes or habits that we might have put into place in advance. So the well-being aspects, I think circling back to the well-being of meditation, movement, nutrition, sleep, those are really core. And I think just like this leader did yesterday, taking a work from home day, taking care of themselves, and also being able to say, here's what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, is really important, because it makes her a better leader, but she's also leading what self-care looks like for herself.
Mm.
The second part that I think is really important is this idea of meaning. And we all process change differently. We all process grief differently. We're all navigating this experience differently. I joke that people are going to remember this time very differently. Like, people with young kids are going to be like, when are they going back to school? I have some retired friends who are like, there's no change. And I have some other friends who are like, this is fantastic, I'm working from home. So like, we're all experiencing, and those are the healthy people, right? Those of
Right.
us who are suffering have different components. So I think the key thing is to figure out, how can you find meaning in this? How can you mark progress, those small steps forward, and kind of get that traction as you start to engage and start to notice the forward progress.
Awesome. And I mean, you've mentioned this a couple different times, but how can, showing compassion as a leader cross over into your personal life as well? Maybe a little bit more on the vertical versus horizontal. That'd be great.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I do think we're reaping the rewards right now of the practices we've built. And, when I think of a lot of, it's a really real struggle right now. I mean, we're seeing financial strains, we're seeing health strains, we're seeing economic strains, we're seeing relationship strains. And for a lot of leaders who are fairly driven people, it's not natural or easy or fun to kind of lower expectations or throttle back. And I think when we do that, we kind of give ourselves permission to navigate. I think the second part of that is not every time is the right time for massive growth. So right now, a lot of people are learning a lot of new horizontal skills. So for example, I'm learning how to be a kindergarten teacher, and it makes my clients makes me crazy to just spend more time with my clients because it's really hard to be a kindergarten teacher. That's a horizontal skill. Then there's vertical skills of how do I navigate complexity? Where do I get triggered? What works in terms of team meetings virtually and what doesn't? And like I said, not everybody has the bandwidth or the capacity to do it now. But one of the things you can give yourself that's exceptionally powerful is to just get a journal, open a Word document. It's actually better to write it out because it changes your neurochemistry. But just start to notice things now because we're so raw, so exposed. There's a lot of things that we have access to now that we might not later. And then the second thing is in that journaling is what else is possible now? We've had so many assumptions disrupted. We've had so many barriers broken down. I do a lot of work in the healthcare industry, and, for 18 months, they've been trying to roll out telemedicine, and in 3.5 days, they rolled out telemedicine. So what else is possible? And I think when we step into that space, it's part of our self-care in some ways. It helps our business, but it also helps us see into the future and the possibility. I've talked a little bit about physical activity. I'll add in another nugget or two on that, which is when we exercise for more than 30 minutes, it shifts our brain chemistry. It shifts our neurochemistry away from this fight, flight, fright kind of adrenaline into this kind of rejuvenation. So not only does it feel good and make us sleep better, but it actually changes our neurochemistry in a way that's going to help us be better.
Oh, interesting. That's very helpful.
Can I throw out one other nugget?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to make sure if anyone has any questions, now would be the time to enter them as well, which you can do in the Q&A, but please go ahead, Camille.
Well, I love questions, and I'm an open book. I was going to share that I have a very dear friend who, after a particularly challenging day with my new job, my new homeschooling job, a friend of mine who has recently navigated kind of a fairly complicated chapter of life, shared that she was doing something called Daily Lemonade. And the Daily Lemonade was such a simple concept that it was so beautiful from my perspective. Daily Lemonade is what is something that you learned or saw or experienced or did or had the opportunity to kind of see from a new perspective that you might not have been able to in just a month ago. And, it can be super silly things like when I take my kids biking, whenever we see a delivery truck, an emergency, police officer, fire truck, an ambulance driver, we stop, we wave, we have a moment. And the fact that my kids are learning that and I'm learning that is awesome. And then there's the silly things too along the way. So Daily Lemonade. Yeah. With or without.
Okay. Well, I mean, it doesn't, let me open the Q&A. How do you cope with performance anxiety? What's your advice for people who spent all their life learning to tone down their ADHD? Yeah. So I guess if you could talk about performance anxiety during this time, that would be great.
Yeah. So performance, first of all, it's really real. Anxiety, this period of time has done an incredible acceleration and amplification. I think there are kind of two questions. I'll take them at separate spaces. ADHD is labeled as a diagnostic, as a disorder. It could also be an incredible asset if you learn to set your life up to be successful around that. So a very simple way of explaining ADD is a Ferrari brain with bicycle brakes. So the brain goes so fast and is so powerful, but when you only have bicycle brakes, it's really challenging. And so a lot of times great leaders actually have ADD because their brain combines information in different ways. And the more you can understand yourself and what you need to be set up for success, the more you can wrap yourself with what you need to be successful, setting up the team, the colleagues, the work environment, the structures that set you up, whether that's, building in an exercise routine so you get some of that energy out, whether you're using certain technologies or certain stimulants like caffeine to help regulate. So I think that's a great example of the dual part of understanding yourself and setting yourself up for success to be better. In terms of anxiety, this is an intense time. Anxiety happens because our body's trying to trigger us to pay attention to something. What gets challenging is if we're getting too much stimulus that we can't necessarily focus. And so when I work with folks, there's sometimes when there's a need for a clinical intervention, and whether that's medication or some deeper therapy, I think there's a lot that we can start to put into place in this time to manage anxiety, and simple practices of mindfulness. I have an Apple Watch which has this little 1 minute breathing app, which is so simple but so powerful. When you're in a setting where you start to feel yourself amping up, there's simple breathing rituals where you start to drop your breath deeper into your belly to almost create the parasympathetic, trigger the parasympathetic nervous system to slow down, to relax. Always having something, this is seltzer water, nothing else, although it is Friday, to be able to take a moment and have a sip, to be able to shift gears. So in terms of performance anxiety, name it, notice the triggers, start to think about how you restructure your environment to set yourself up for success, whether that's hydration or exercise or deep belly breathing. And then the last thing, and maybe we can add this into the follow-up email, is we have a metaphor that we often use with leaders around a donut. And the idea is that there's some things that are in your comfort zone, which is safe, easy, and familiar. There's some things that are in your donut, your learning zone, where you're growing, developing new skills, capabilities. And then outside the donut is where you hit what I call terror's edge or analysis paralysis. And that's really where you want to, where anxiety can creep in. If we can start to notice the comfort zone, learning zone, terror's edge, we can start to then break projects down into smaller chunks, smaller pieces that are a little bit more accessible, a little bit more engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. So James would like to know, speaking in perspective, one thing I remind my clients and my team members is that what we're going through is something very singular, but in the grand scheme of things, we all have it pretty darn good. Compare this to a war, to a famine, to a genocide, to tyranny. It becomes easier to cope. What do you think of this approach? Like, I guess he's saying this is how he has been explaining it to his team. So what, do you have any advice or tips, or do you think this is a good way for him to be explaining that?
Yeah, that's a great connection. Well, so first of all, I would say it's phenomenal that you're thinking about the meaning, right? Because that's what helps us move from post-traumatic stress disorder to post-traumatic growth, is to be able to have a meaning and an understanding of why is this happening and what is it how are we going to navigate going forward? I think the one kind of caution I would have is for most of us, this is a challenging experience that we will navigate through, and we will come out stronger. For some of us, it's going to be potentially really hard financially, and there's going to be some of us that are losing loved ones. So that's just the one kind of caveat I would have, is I think you can say, this is how I'm making meaning, and this is what I'm grieving. Like, I realize I'm getting rid of this, and this is what I'm grateful for. There's no genocide, there's no famine, our supply chains are open. And so when you hold both of those, it allow the other person to have their experience and to navigate forward. I think the other part of that question is a key part of leadership is being able to hear or intuit or understand, what is it your team needs? Do they need you to create space to hear what they're going through? Or do they need you to step up and say, you know what, this is tough, we're going to get through it. And, I have complete faith that we're going to find the path forward, and I'm excited for that. And so I'd kind of hold both of those in that response. But definitely make meaning, because that's really important right now. We need to come together, have that meaning, have that sense of purpose.
Awesome.
And I will also add, just happiness is progress, not necessarily, the activity. Like, it's not about going out to dinner. It's about knowing that pretty soon we will be able to go out to dinner.
Right. Awesome. Okay. So, oh, he says great answer. Thank you. Personalized empathy is a key component of his approach. So thank you so much. So if we have any other last minute questions, please type them in now. But while we wait for those, Camille, thank you so much for joining us. What are the biggest takeaways that you would say from today's presentation? What do you want people to know?
I think the two things that I think are the most important as I am working with leaders is that idea of 5 stages. And this is in one of the articles, Leading Through Crisis, that we'll hopefully send out, is start to notice where you are. Are you still trying to redesign your strategy? Are you starting to implement it and have a lot of changes, like doing the furlough? Are you still grieving? Are you moving into innovation? And then also start to notice that it's not a linear process. You're not going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. You might go 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 4. It's so notice where you are in this process. I think starting to plan for that reemergence, starting to plan into the future, I think helps you with the meaning. It helps you with the sense of hope, the tragic optimism, and it also is what so many people are looking for. So that's one thing I would say. And then if you have the bandwidth right now, to start to notice what you need to do in terms of your own leadership development, that depth. I would say, if you can't do it right now, totally understand. I get that. A lot of people are still super busy, and don't miss the opportunity to write those things down, because they will keep coming back in new and different forms. And I welcome people sending me an email. I'm obviously in the Workbar community. If there are ways I can follow, ways I can be of support.
One last thing before we close. So Giovanni wants to know, how can we begin preparing to reintegrate into the new normal? What are your tips for that? I know that's kind of case by case, obviously, but any general tips that you have would be great.
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm most focused on with folks around this, which it's a great question. One is, what assumptions were broke, what dismantled, shattered, what assumptions did you have about your business, and what is now possible? If you think about those two things, it'll give you a lot of gateway. I think the other thing is the rapid transition to work from home and then collaborating remotely gives us a line of sight to where there's this is like pressure on a system, and that shows you where there are cracks in the foundation. Again, start to notice those, because that'll give you line of sight to either human capital strategies or culture issues or product development opportunities. And so I think it's that innovation that will guide you into that next stage of reemerging that is really where I think.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been so helpful. As Camille mentioned, she is a Cambridge member, so cannot wait to see you again in person. But I will be sending out a follow-up email with the best ways to connect with Camille, and then also a couple of the resources that she had mentioned throughout the presentation. So please look out for that email, and we'll go from there. And next week is going to be Finance Week, so please, tune in and look out for the email about joining us for those, because I know that's a very timely topic right now. So again, Camille, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, stay well, everyone. Be healthy and take care of your loved ones and your teams.
Great. Thank you so much, Camille. Have a good one.